All right, chapter 21 is about amino acids and proteins. All right, so proteins are biomolecules that contain many amide bonds formed by joining amino acids. So an amide bond is this bond right here when you have the nitrogen of one amino acid bonded to the carbonyl of another amino acid. So this is an amino acid. They're called amino acids because they have both an amine group and a carboxylic acid group. All right, remember if you see COOH, it's the same as C-carbonyl O with an OH right there. All right, and we have different R groups. Now there are 20 different amino acids that every animal uses, or every living organism uses on the planet. There are 20 of them. A few of them our bodies synthesize, other ones we have to get from our diet. Those are called the essential amino acids, which we will talk a little bit about. All right, but pretty much there are 20 different R groups on the amino acids. All right, but pretty much, and then you have a carbon, which this carbon is chiral, because notice you have 4 different groups, as long as you don't have a hydrogen here. All right, but you'll have 4 different groups. They are chiral, but every living organism only uses one form, only one of the stereoisomers, one of the enantiomers. And every living organism uses the same one on the whole planet, which is interesting. All right, so you basically take one amino acid and you take another amino acid, all right, and hook up this carbonyl with this nitrogen group to it. And that's what you get, and that's what a protein is, or a peptide bond. This is called a peptide bond, or a protein is when you have more than like two or more amino acids hooked together, you have what's called a protein. So protein are basically amide bonds, or you'll see it's called a peptide bond. It's basically, so here is one amino acid. You can see one of them right here, nitrogen, carbon, carbonyl. Here's another amino acid. Again, nitrogen, carbon, carbonyl. Here's another one, nitrogen, carbon, carbonyl. All right, notice we are changing the R groups. Depending on the R groups, changes the type of protein we have. You can have, you can have like 3 amino acids, or you can have, thousands and thousands of amino acids, like in larger biomolecules. But pretty much how they all work is it's 20 amino acids just bonded in a different order. All right, these are just some facts. Proteins make up 50% of our body, our dry weight body. So if you get rid of all the water, half of our body is proteins. I mean, almost everything is a protein in our body. Everything from our skin to our organs, our hair, our nails, our enzymes, which basically are the catalysts of everything inside our body. Unlike lipids and proteins, proteins are not stored, so they are not consumed. All right, our bodies don't break down proteins unless we are in starvation mode and we don't have any lipids or carbohydrates anymore left in our body. Then, in order for the organism to survive, it will then convert proteins into sugars, which is called gluconeogenesis. That's a process where a lot of people will go into if they are in starvation mode. Possibly if you're on a very low carbohydrate diet, or a very low fat and carbohydrate diet, and on a very high protein diet, your body will start converting all that protein into glucose, and it's a process called gluconeogenesis. Um, Current recommendation is about about a gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. If you exercise a lot more, you'll need more. If you don't exercise as much, you technically don't need as much. Also, children need quite a bit more because their bodies are constantly are in a building mode. Anytime that you're in a building mode, if you want to increase the amount of muscle, if you're growing, you want to consume more protein because your body needs it. If you are not in a growing mode, then you don't need as much protein. Some sources of protein. This is not a complete source. It's meat and milk. Obviously, you can get lots from vegetables as well, or non-meat or milk, non-animal products. Rice and beans is a very good source of all the essential amino acids that you actually need. Green leafy foods have quite a bit of protein in it as well. Spirulina, which I believe is like an algae of some sort, has a very high amount of protein that you can actually consume. All right, here's just examples of where we see the most common protein sources of our body. Hemoglobin is our blood. That is a protein that transports oxygen. We obviously have tons of that because we need to transport a lot of oxygen into our body. Basically, we will talk about the protein structure of hemoglobin, but pretty much what it does is it grabs an oxygen molecule from our lungs and then it goes out into our body and it leaves the oxygen in our muscle, our brain, and all of our organisms and cells. Collagen, which is a fibrous protein, which is used in connective tissue, tendons, bone, cartilage, blood vessels, even our nails and our hair to a certain extent, but keratin is usually more for our nails, skin, and hair. Ferritin is a protein that's stored that stores iron in our liver. If you remember, iron is Fe. All right, stands for ferrous. That's where this ferritin is coming from. Actin and myosin, these are proteins controlled muscle contractions. If you've ever taken anatomy and physiology, you learn a lot about actin and myosin. Insulin, which is the hormone produced by our pancreas, which pulls glucose into our cells. It's the hormone responsible for pulling glucose into our cells. Our cells then break the glucose down and get the energy it needs from it. And then myoglobin is a protein like hemoglobin, which is actually stored in our tissues, which accept the oxygen from the hemoglobin. So the hemoglobin grabs the oxygen, flows through the body, gives the oxygen to myoglobin. The myoglobin then takes the oxygen and it goes into our cells. But we'll talk more about a lot of these a little bit later. Here's just some key features. I've already kind of talked about this about amino acids. You have the alpha carbon, which is chiral. All right. And then you have the amine group, you have the carboxyl group or the carboxylic acid group, however you want to call it, and then you have the R group, whatever the R group is. Okay, the simplest amino acid is glycine, where a hydrogen is the R group. This is the only achiral amino acid. So glycine is the simplest form of the amino acid. In this class, you will not have to memorize all 20 R groups. If you do take a biochemistry class or a molecular biology class in the future, a more advanced class, they might make you memorize it. But otherwise in this class, you can just have a list of all those. Okay, so the R groups is what's called the side chain. Our side chain is what it identifies the amino acid that we have. So glycine is with the hydrogen, and there are other ones. There's serine and glutamine and tryptophan. So all these are types of amino acids. If R is a basic amino acid, meaning if this group is basic, it will have a nitrogen on it. We also have acidic ones, which I think I'll talk about, and there is a carboxylic acid group. So your R group here, in this case it's an H, but you can have R groups which have a nitrogen on it. This would be a base or a basic form, or your R group will have another carboxylic acid group on it. So rather than having this, every amino acid has this. It's just this part of it is changing. Okay, and we will talk about the 20 possible amino acids. Okay, general features of amino acids. So again, we're talking about the amine group and the carboxylic acid group. Notice we have both a basic group. We talked about in the amine chapter how nitrogen can act as a base, as a proton acceptor. If you have some sort of acidic proton, this nitrogen can actually accept the proton. All right, and we also have a carboxylic acid. So we have both a base and an acid on the same molecule. Well, we just said a base can pluck off an acidic hydrogen, and that's exactly how these amino acids actually exist in nature. All right, they exist as an NH3 plus and a COO minus. It's what's called a zwitterion. A zwitterion is a salt. This is actually considered a salt, an ionic salt, because we have an ionic charge. We have a cation. All right, we have a cation here, and we have an anion over here. All right, so these are actually salts. They're actually solids. If you actually have an amino acid, they exist as solids. They do not exist as liquids because they are ionic salts. All right, so depending on the pH of the solution, you can actually change this. If you're in a more acidic environment, you actually start protonating this side of it, which I believe we show in a later chapter. Yeah, we show it right there. So I'll talk about it when we get to it. All right, these are the types of amino acids. So there are 20 common naturally occurring amino acids. All right, this is a list of, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Is there 16 of them here? Yeah. All right. Here's alanine, which has a methyl group. Asparagine, you notice, has an amide group. Here's asparagine. It's a CH2 with a carbonyl and an NH2. All right. Cysteine has a hydrogen. Glutamine also has an amide bond, but notice has 2 carbons, opposed to asparagine only has 1 carbon. Glycine is the only achiral one, has a hydrogen. Isoleucine, I believe, is an isopropyl group, isobutyl group actually. Leucine, all right. Methionine also has a sulfur. Phenylalanine, this is kind of a common one. Here's phenylalanine. Proline is the only one that is cyclical. So the thing about proline is you have your amino acid, all right, your amine and your acid group, all right, H, and you have your nitrogen and your R group. Well, in this case, your R group is actually hooked onto the nitrogen. All right, so that's the only case. So notice here's your chiral carbon, and your R group, which is here, pulls back onto the nitrogen. All right, so that's what's interesting about proline. Proline in amino acids are these straight chains. I'm sorry, proteins are these straight chains of amino acids. Well, if the amino acid has a kink in it or a turn, usually it's a bunch of prolines hanging off here on the side, which actually cause it to actually turn. Not all turns have prolines, but a lot of times when you see a kink in a protein of some sort, they're usually a bunch of prolines that make it have that structure. Here's serine and threonine. Tryptophan is also a very common one, which is in a lot of muscle. Tyrosine and valine. These are, what is this? Naturally occurring. I don't know what the difference is. Valine, tyrosine. What's the difference? 20 naturally occurring. I don't know what the difference is between these two. I think it's the same chart. All right, here are the acidic and basic amino acids. There are 5 of them total. There are 2 acidic ones, aspartic acid and glutamic acid. All right, you can see that they have an extra carboxylic acid group at the end. And then here are the amine ones, or the basic ones. All right, you have arginine, histidine, and lysine. These have nitrogen groups hanging off of it. All right, so that just kind of gives you a rundown of a whole bunch of them. Stereochemistry, like I said, you have a chiral center. This is in a Fisher projection. You guys remember the Fisher projections? They have these T crosses, which basically means this group here is coming out of the page towards you, and the same thing for this one, and these are going back. All right, so here's alanine. The naturally occurring amino acids are the L isomers. All right, are all the L's. You remember we have L and we have D. All of the L, we'll call them the left-handed form. Is the naturally occurring. All right, so L amino acids have the NH3 on the left side, where D's have them on the right side. But all naturally occurring are the L. Nothing, no plant, animal, any living organism has any D amino acids on it. Okay, so the zwitterion, all right, so we talked about this, that this is actually how it exists. You have the hydrogen from the carboxylic acid actually exists on the nitrogen. And remember, it's called a zwitterion. So at certain pHs, you can actually alter this, okay? But at a specific pH, usually between a pH of 6 to about 8, you have what's called a neutral molecule, meaning exactly 100% of these protons are on the nitrogen, and that's what's called the isoelectric pH, is when you have a completely neutral molecule, okay? However, if you add, so let's say we are at the isoelectric point on this molecule, okay? Let's say we're at a pH of 6, but I add more acid into it. Well, what's going to happen? I start changing my pH here, and I start going to, let's say, like a pH of 1. I'm way more acidic. Well, what happens is this negative charge starts protonating itself. I start putting hydrogens on this carboxylic acid, and now it exists in this stage. Okay, so I still have an NH3 plus, but notice all of my O minuses have been capped off with a hydrogen. And again, I'm at a pH lower than 2. So now I have an overall charge of a +1. So I can actually take the zwitterion, at the isoelectric point and alter, I can alter the actual charge on it. By adding more protons, I can protonate this. If I go into a basic environment, which is right here, in the basic environment, the hydroxide starts plucking off these hydrogens and makes this now neutral and makes this into a negative charge. So here, if I'm at a pH of, let's say 7 at my isoelectric point or equal, if I go more acidic, I now get more of a plus charge on my molecule because I still have the NH3 plus, but I've capped off my carboxylic acid. If I go more basic and add hydroxides, I pluck off the hydrogen off of the nitrogen, and I still have a negative charge on this. I now have a -1 charge. So depending on the pH, I can alter its charge. And our bodies will do this. Our bodies are pretty set at the pH, but if you go a little bit higher in the pH or a little bit lower, you can actually start altering this, which you can have a very drastic effect on the person if they go alkalotic or acidotic. All right, so let's pause right there for this video, and I'll pick it up with the next video.